Hi everyone, we're on to part 4 of the SMX screen installation. We're going to cover installing the masking system. This is probably the trickiest part. We're actually going to have to pull out a drill bit for this one, but it's not too bad. The first thing we do is we'll want to make some marks on our frame, and I imagine you're probably going to do this after you install the screen, but I don't have my screen material right now, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how the masking system works and how it's installed. So what I've done here is I'm assuming that my full screen is going to be CinemaScope, and I've come along here and you can go online and calculate the dimensions for like a 16:9 or a 4:3 as well. And so what I've done is I've come here and I've marked those off, and then I've come in about another 8 inches and I've marked what I put the max. And what we're going to do is we're going to put some stop screws in here, and that's going to basically represent the max travel for our masking system. And we do that because obviously, 4x3 is probably going to be where we actually set the motorized mask to stop. But if we set this max here, it allows us to tension everything, and it allows us to install the mask fabric and install it here and roll it up maybe a little bit, so that when we hit this 4x3, we're not like totally running out of fabric. We'll actually have a little bit of extra, and it'll help keep things in place. So yeah, mark out your 4x3 or whatever you want your max to be, and then come in a little bit farther and put some set screws there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back. So for my set screws, I'm actually using one of these drop-in nuts with a screw, and I found these figure-8 kind of double washers online. And you don't have to get this fancy. If you wanted to, you can just wrap the shock cord right around the screw, or you can come up with any number of ways to really anchor that down. But this will make sense as I install it. Really, we have these shock cords, and they're going to stretch across the screen, and they're going to actually apply tension to the mask to help it keep it sliding smoothly. And then as the rollers unroll, it will actually pull the mask back toward the center. So I'm going to go ahead and install these now, and hopefully it will give you a better idea of how this works. Okay, so I've got my 4 stop nuts in place, and I've attached my shock cord. You can see up here, and one thing I did forget to mention is that always consider the inside of the frame here as the start of your screen. So when you measure your aspect ratios out, start from this corner here rather than the outside. The reason for that is because you're going to have a frame sitting here covering up most of this. So it'll be like a black mask frame. So I can show you a little bit about how this works. In the parts list, you'll find these sliders, and these are made out of ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, and it's a fancy name for really hard plastic. The only people who make this pre-made to a slider that would fit this channel is 8020, and the part number is on my AVS forum post. There is one that Bosch makes, but it only fits the metric channel. And even though the slot in the channel for the metric is roughly the same size, the shape or inside profile doesn't fit, and I learned that the hard way. So don't buy the Bosch ones or the ones from Framing Tech. Get these 8020 ones. So basically, we have this shock cord, and it's anchored down to the stop nut that we have there, and we basically pull it across and attach it to one of these sliders like this. And what that does for us is when the motor pulls on the fabric, it's going to come this way. And then when the motor releases the fabric, the shock cord is going to pull it back. And you can see that there's an eyelet installed. It comes with 2 holes pre-drilled. So we're going to try to reuse those just in the name of minimizing the actual amount of work. And I've just tied this loosely just to kind of show you. But ultimately we're going to have an aluminum bar that stretches up to the top one as well, and it will be a full mask. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install the eyelet in this one, and then I'm going to show you how to attach the aluminum bar so that both the top and the bottom are connected and will move in sync with each other. And when you're actually affixing the shock cord to the eyelet there, you want to give it some tension so that it will actually pull all the way back to the stop. And what I like to do, like I do this all the time, what I decided was good was that if you come in about 1 foot, and if you can pull a little bit, you feel a little bit of tension here with the eyelet, but you want to make sure that you can pull it all the way back to the very end without running out of tension. You don't want it to be too tight. You also don't want it to be too loose. So it might take a little bit of experimentation, but it should work out. Okay, I've got all my shock cords tensioned, my sliders installed, and you know, if you're confident in your knots, I'm just using a cinch or a ram's head knot. These will probably work. They also make clamps specifically for shock cords, which are just kind of wires that will wrap around and you can clamp them down. That might be a little bit safer in the long run, and I may end up doing that. But now that I've got the sliders installed and in place, I'm going to want to turn my attention to this aluminum bar part that we bought. And this one I think is an 1/8 inch thick and 1.5 inches wide. I may bump up to a 1/4 inch if I find out that this doesn't work, but so far it seems to be stiff enough. You want to cut it to be basically as long as the outside of your screen is tall. So from the very top edge to the very bottom edge, you'll basically cut it to that size. And then we're going to come in about 1/4 inch, and we're going to drill a hole and mount it on the hole of the top slider there. And then we'll come down here and we'll mark where it lines up here, and we'll drill a hole there. And then we're going to insert a screw to join them. If you've never drilled metal before, you're going to want to go nice and slow. Aluminum is really soft, so it's not very hard. You just have to be patient. Go nice and slow so you don't overheat your drill bit, and you'll be through it in no time. Alright, so I'm up here at the top, and I've attached the aluminum bar with, I think it's a number 8 or a number 10 screw. It's about 5/8 long. Just whatever you can find at the hardware store that is about the right size for the hole that's in the slider. And I attached this fairly tight. There's not a lot of wiggle room, but obviously this is plastic, so you need to be gentle. You don't want to strip it out. So it's fairly tight, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down the ladder. And the idea here is that I'm going to mark pretty close right where it needs to have a hold for the side down here. And it needs to be pretty close, but doesn't have to be perfect, as you'll see in a minute. So I've drilled this second hole. I I used a 3/16 bit, so a fairly large bit compared to the screw. There's going to be a fair amount of play in it, as you can see, and that's a good thing because you want it to be able to wiggle around and take if there are any imperfections in the way that the sliders move, it keeps it from binding up. So now that I have a hole on both sides, I'm going to go ahead and attach this bar to the sliders. I'm going to do it very loosely so that there's that wiggle room. You want it tight enough that it's not going to flop around a lot, but you want it loose enough that it's going to be able to absorb small imperfections. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. Okay, so we've got the bar installed here, and you can see it's there's not too much wiggle room. I could probably do to be just a little bit tighter, but basically it's loose enough that I can move it a little bit on its own. If you imagine if this thing were bolted on there super tight, the moment it got out of square, it would just bind up. So we want to keep it loose so it doesn't bind up. And it's hard to move both the top and bottom at the same time with my hand, but you can see that there is a good slide there, and our shock cord gives it a nice solid return. So I'm going to do that to both sides, and really I'm just dry fitting it right now because I have to remove the bar to put the fabric on. So rather than moving on to fabric, I'm going to instead move on to programming the motors, and I'll just use some nylon strap to join the aluminum bars for the masking to the rollers. And the reason I want to do that is I'll do a whole separate video on installing the screen and installing the mask, and I want to actually be able to see the rollers and show you what's going on for the programming of the motors. So we'll do that in the next episode.